stories that if anyone got cut or hurt or injured, they were taken immediately away and never returned. There was a camp doctor with no medical training. His last name was Schacht, S-C-H-A-C-H-T, Lawrence Schacht, Houston, Texas. I believe he's the grandson of the Schacht family that moved there from Nazi Germany. Hjalmar Schacht, Reichsminister of Economics, invented the phrase, Arbeit macht frei, work will make you free, on the gate to Auschwitz and the concentration camps. Mr. Schacht was the camp doctor at Jonestown. He sutured without any anesthetic or anything to kill the pain. He's described as a very kindly sort of a doctor there with these people that were tortured, forced sexual abuse, kept up 16 to 18 hours a day, classic programming techniques, given these drugs, worked to points of exhaustion in a labor camp. Why? First, to find out if they could do it, if they could make it work, and not insignificantly on that population. This is a population that is 90% women, 80% black. This is the population of Jonestown. Where did they get them? Jones set up a phony rest home in Ukiah, California, surrounded by barbed wire and guards. There were 8 mysterious deaths reported in the Ukiah press of people who tried to leave the area. Researched and investigated by Kathy Hunter. Not allowed to leave, an armed camp even there. He's surrounded, he's with the John Birch Society and the Republican Party. He's working for Nixon, he's openly right-wing, until he moves down to San Francisco and suddenly becomes a Moscone liberal so that they can take them off the welfare rolls. But at Happy Haven's Rest Home in Ukiah, nice name, he brings in elderly from the rest homes. He gets 150 children given to him by the courts as wards of the court. He gets people taken from the psychiatric institutions into his care. People that go for treatment on drug or substance abuse are referred to him. He's given a population to work with. And who is Jones? Indiana, son of the Ku Klux Klan, close boyhood friend of Dan Mitrione, the CIA torture agent who later trained the Guyanese Defense Forces. An infamous agent eventually killed down in Paraguay by revolutionary forces. Mitrione knows Jones. Mitrione is with the CIA in Brazil when Jones decides to leave his ministry in Indiana and take it to Brazil. The whole time that he's there, his groceries, according to neighbors, are delivered in State Department cars. He's given rides in official U.S. government and embassy cars. He has his money paid while he's there. He comes back with $100,000 in his pocket. This guy that his Indiana landlady said he's a gangster that uses a Bible instead of a gun. Okay, he's pulling chicken livers out of his mouth. These phony faith healings. He goes down to Brazil. God knows what he's doing down there. You know, he's down there at the time of a attempted CIA coup. He's supposedly carrying on this ministry. He comes back with $100,000 in his pocket, and he says, oh, the U.S. ambassador's wife gave it to me for sleeping with her because I'm so good in bed. Right, Jim. He goes to Ukiah and sets that up. He comes into San Francisco, and all of his people through Moscone get jobs in the welfare department, and they take the people off the welfare rolls and put them into the People's Temple. But by the time they're ready to go to Guyana, then the real operation begins. The people are stuffed into buses. The children are stuffed into the luggage compartments. They're taken without word of where they're going across country to Miami. They're loaded onto Pan Am planes, long history of intelligence involvement. They're flown down to Guyana. I talked to the air traffic controller on site when they landed. He told me every black person that came out of that plane, except for the children, was bound and gagged. Arriving in Guyana. People 5 miles away in the Guyana bush did not know that a single black person lived at the People's Temple site in Jonestown. The whites were allowed to come and go. The blacks were in the slave labor camp. And when Leo Ryan threatened to expose it, they pulled the plug. They murdered everyone there, including Ryan, to tell Congress that they better not stick their nose in their business. Why did they want a slave batch in the jungles of Guyana? You have to know about Guyana. It's one of the most mineral-rich areas in the world. Bauxite, uranium, gold, manganese, iron ore. The little boat landing on the river, the railroad tracks that went to the Kaituma airport, Port Kaituma itself, were built by who? Union Carbide, to support an old manganese mine. 5 Points, and the area all around Matthews Ridge was the richest gold area in Guyana. I read books on the history of this. This is Orinoco River Valley. Venezuela wants it. There's a contested border dispute. But they can't get anyone to work it. No one wants to live back in the jungle. 95% of the population live along the coast. The air is clear, you know, they're near the sea. Why go back and live in the jungle? And the hardship's there. So from 1909 on, a family called Lakou in Guyana works to import populations from around the world to go into that site. From 1909 on, Noonan is one family, Lakou is the other. Lakou at the time of the Jonestown becomes the lawyer for Jim Jones. This guy is listed in Guinness World Records as being a lawyer who's never lost a case. Everyone he's ever defended has won. I'm sure it's his legal skills. He's the lawyer in Guyana for Jim Jones. The American lawyer is Mark Lane. Okay, and they're running this little operation down there because they want to find out if they can get somebody to come in. I found 1936 records from Adolf Eichmann. He's discussing at the Hebrew desk the final solution, before the final solution, the next to final solution. What are they going to do with the Jews? Well, let's move them abroad. And they actually take 50 Jewish families, where? To Guyana, to Jonestown, to Matthews Ridge, what's later called Jonestown, not then. But the experiment doesn't work. They take people from the Dominican Republic and try to move them in there. After the Jonestown Massacre, they move in the Hmong people from Vietnam, the ones that ran the opium for the CIA. And they try to put them there and eventually move them down to Suriname. The Christian Right, Samaritan's Purse, World Vision makes arrangements to move people from other parts of refugee populations in the world down to Guyana. They want to put somebody in there who's going to work the area. And they've got a plan to see whether they can use MK Ultra. The people around Jones, the top lieutenants of Jones, the people that formed the bank accounts, have extensive family ties and connections to U.S. biological and chemical warfare, like Dr. Lawrence Layton, who headed it up at Dugway Proving Grounds from 1956 to 1964. The daughter Debbie Layton married Philip Blakey. That's a Nazi money family in Germany. They're the largest investors in Solvay, which is IG Farben, the huge Nazi drug cartel. It was busted up at the beginning of the war, but regrouped after the war under different guises. Solvay drugs in the United States. You have other people around Jones with like Terry Buford, the daughter of the head of Naval Intelligence 7th Fleet for the whole Philadelphia base and the 7th Fleet going out to sea. These are not the sons and daughters, the people off the street. The whites directly around Jones, the inner core, are from very rich families, top lieutenants. The women that follow Charlie Manson into that scenario are the daughters of top-ranking military intelligence agents in the United States. People whose credit cards and cars and children were stolen by Charlie Manson. But when he becomes a national figure, do they make a peep? The woman who gave Squeaky Fromm, one of Manson's women, the gun. She says she stole it from him, but he was her sugar daddy, paying her rent, buying her groceries. You're going to steal something from somebody like that, you're going to be out in the street. She says she stole the gun from him. But the gun that she uses in the attempted assassination on Gerald Ford, it doesn't work because it doesn't have any bullets in it, because somebody else was supposed to shoot him. But Squeaky gets this gun from a guy, and they say he's a draftsman, which he is. He's only been doing that the last 2 years, though. I look into his background, 28 years Air Force intelligence. At every turn in the Kennedy case, I find Navy intelligence. Just today, report over at the conference, Jack Revell, one of the key characters, driven to the site by a Navy intelligence agent, he tells us. Oswald ties with Navy intelligence. Jack Ruby, connections with Navy intelligence. Guy Bannister ties to Navy intelligence in New Orleans, the people that surround Oswald. Other people, the DeMoran-Shields, long history, anti-communist and CIA connections. These people are spies, they're part of the intelligence agencies. So they circle around these situations, they create a phony scenario. What are we being told? What are we being told by these cults that are destroyed? What's the message to us? Is it to, be a good white Christian, stay on the straight state line, don't believe anything else, don't think you can separate yourself from the society in any way, don't think you can live communally? I mean, I'm telling you about Charlie Manson because he was the last hippie allowed on television. He was the death of the counterculture. The other death was Altamont, set up with the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stones were taken from that to meet with F. Lee Bailey, Jack Ruby's lawyer, and a long-term intelligence lawyer, at the headquarters of the Defense Industrial Securities Command in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. From Altamont to Muscle Shoals to DISC, Defense Industrial Security Command. That's the largest internal police force in the United States. Totally secret, directly under Defense Intelligence Agency. They're the people that surrounded Karen Silkwood and murdered her. The people that tied into the murder of John F. Kennedy. The people in the black helicopters that you get all this flap about. That's DISC. That's Industrial Security for the Military-Industrial Complex. Okay, they're not men from Mars or anything strange. There's something that were created, but they got out of control. Tennessee Valley Authority to guard the atomic secrets under David Lilienthal, and they go into the rest of history. And these DISC people, you know, surround, but why take these rock stars? I mean, their only crime is they were paying sympathy for the devil when somebody got clubbed to death by the Hells Angels, who they hired as security at this concert. Why are they flown in to the headquarters of Defense Industrial Security Command after Altamont? I think Altamont is the dark coin, the other side of Woodstock, in order to show that you can't have a different kind of culture, a different kind of society. Because as long as you live in separate houses, and you buy each of those, you have a separate bank account and a separate insurance account, you buy 16 lawnmowers per block and 16 washing machines per block, you know, everything's duplicated. That's how the system works. If you make sense, you go to your neighbor and say, hey, Fred, we can buy a big lawnmower, all of us chip in, you know, everybody use it, fix it when it gets broke, you know. That's communism. That's not common sense, it's communism. So, you know, they don't want you to live that way. They don't want you to go in any other direction than the one that they've set out for you. So I think that's part of the game. The other part is that they can use these as recruiting elements. But I went in and I look at these things and I find the elements over and over again. And I looked at the Jonestown stuff. I also have found cults that were created by the intelligence agencies completely, I think, like Scientology, which came directly out of naval intelligence. L. Ron Hubbard from Scientology worked for Navy intelligence in World War II. His job was to infiltrate other cults and find out what was going on in cults and whether they could use cults. You might think they don't know anything about that or want to know anything about that. British intelligence used astrological cults and information. They got an astrologer to infiltrate the Reich because they knew that Hitler was relying on astrological information. So British intelligence replaced his astrologer and gave him an astrologer who would tell him to do the wrong thing. It's in the stars. I mean, you know, this is common sense. It's not, ooh, you. It just makes sense. I mean, if the idiot will go for that, you know, then we find out Reagan's looking at the stars. They had a great cartoon. Reagan's looking in the star book, and Ed Meese is there. And he says, what's your sign, Ed? And it's over his neck. It says, for sale. Okay. But they look into these cults, and so who's doing it with them? Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, Navy intelligence, L. Ron Hubbard Navy intelligence, World War II looking into the cults. And who's Crowley's partner in the operation? Jack Parsons. Am I getting any closer to UFO people? Jack Parsons, the co-pilot of somebody named Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold, 1947, flying discs. What's the first close encounter? Washington State. Over the lake, boy and his son. The mysterious metal drops out of the saucer. It's not of earthly origin. Who saw it? Fred Lee Chrisman, identified as one of the 3 tramps in Dealey Plaza. I'm sure it's a coincidence. Where do the stories come from? What do they cover? What use is it? But they can use these cults as a breeding ground to pick out or program assassins, just as they can use refugee communities. They didn't burn up the buildings well enough, and then they had to admit eventually that this murder-suicide was in fact just plain old murder in Switzerland and in Canada. If we could have gotten a little further into the MOVE situation in Philadelphia, we would have found out what that was too, or the shootout and burning of the SLA. These are military operations. They're carried on with military C4 equipment in Philadelphia for MOVE. That's military explosives. It's not allowed legally in the hands of civilian police. Civilian police are not supposed to go to your door with an M14 tank and a flamethrower and knock the damn thing down. That's the military. You know, if you go back and look at the Founding Fathers, they understood from the British that they better not make the police and the military the same thing. They better draw a line in those functions. That's what the SS is in Nazi Germany. The Schutzstaffel, it's the police and the military combined into one function. That's the way the totalitarian state operates. Even at the end of the Civil War, there was some of that, and they passed this Posse Comitatus Act to say that, you know, we've got to separate and draw these lines. But not now. Now I've got the former mayor of D.C. is just out, and Mayor Barry's back in, so he probably won't suggest it, but I don't know, because these suggestions don't come from the mayor really. They just parrot them. But she wanted the National Guard to go out and ride in the police cars around D.C. and to stop the drugs. Armed National Guard. Those fools will shoot. They're going to start a riot. They're not trained like police. Police are trained not to shoot. The Guard are trained to shoot. Okay, so you're going to put police in the military, Then, on top of that, that's not enough. We're going to have a hiring priority program so that the first people hired for the police, all new rookies, have to be veterans. So they'll have the police training. Then we take all the current rookies and we're sending them down to military army bases and down to Fort Belvoir and down to Quantico, and they train them in psychological warfare operations that were developed in the 1920s in Germany. And they have these psychological scenarios, and they act them out. So they give them military training, they give them military weapons, SWAT. When you're in trouble, you call the police, and the police are in trouble, they call SWAT. SWAT was trained by military. SWAT uses military techniques. So it's a militarization of the police force. And then they give us scenarios to see what we'll put up with. The so-called Symbionese Liberation Army. When you look at the backgrounds of the actual people, William and his wife, the Atwoods, and Angela DeAngelique, they were narcotic squad bust police for the Indiana State Police Division. They weren't radicals. They never held up a gun or a picture of Chairman Mao or anything. They didn't have any history of any political activity until they suddenly became the armed Symbionese Liberation Army. Other people in the circle were strippers at clubs and people that sold fruit stands, and they had no radical history. I mean, you don't go from, you know, thinking something's wrong with this country to picking up a gun, having a revolutionary slogan. There's got to be some process in there where you start to think differently. I was laughing this morning because Dick Russell, one of the researchers, had found this thing, an actual quote from one of these CIA programmers talking about getting a Marine who was a patriotic American and creating two personalities. You have Marine A and Marine B, and personality A is a patriotic American, but then you create a second personality that's a communist that believes in communist ideology and infiltrates the communist cells, but personality A still knows what B is doing, even though he disagrees with the ideology, and so he can tap into one and say, now you're A, go be the communist. Then he comes back and he says, hey, B, what's A been doing? Okay, so this is the scenario. I mean, this guy's writing this down. He said, but it didn't work, and the communists turned it around on us. And I was laughing because I thought, my God, I mean, it must take a lot longer to program somebody to be a communist than a patriotic American. I mean, that's 300 ideas compared to 3. Okay, so, you know, I don't know how they did the programming over in the Soviet Union, but it must have been amusing, the Soviets trying to, you know, mother an apple pie and hate commies. But, you know, if in fact they did it, maybe the guys themselves just turned around. But each one of these things had the same connections. In Jonestown, I found that the bank accounts tied back directly to the Vatican Bank and to the CIA. And I get the second cult leader's body found, you know, and they're going on about these guys. Affluent society, solid citizens, they got money. They're not from six-figure real estate transfers. This is like Jonestown, $2 million in real estate. Then it says, oh, guess what we found out? The cult briefly held its money where? At the Bank of Commerce and Credit Canada, part of the Bank of Commerce and Credit International. You ever hear of them? BCCI? The scandal bank? I mean, that's what when you follow the money, this isn't some jerk on the block. This is some guy who's got police protection. Nobody's looking at what he's doing. It's hands off. They're isolated, and they do what they want. And then they were, you know, I don't know why the burning didn't work, but I mean, first you have to believe that a white minister in Guyana can tell black people to take their children and put cyanide down their mouth. Now, I think that's a racist lie on the face of it. Okay, you get to Waco, you've got to believe not only that the minister is telling the other people that they have to be in a suicide. Okay, you got to get past that one. But let's say you believe that. He said suicide, and they say, yes, minister, suicide. Let's all kill ourselves. Okay, how? Fire. Fire? The most painful possible death? We're going to burn ourselves up. I mean, we're not talking Buddhist monks here with years of training to go into some other consciousness while they burn up. We're talking about rock musicians and young kids with, like, you know, ouch, if they touch a match. Okay, but now you got to go step 3. We've got them to suicide. They're going to burn up. Okay, light me up. I don't care what you think. That's only 5 or 10% of your body cells. The rest of the body cells don't have the same idea. You start burning, you start moving. You see a fire with people stuck in a place, they're by the door, they're by the window, they're crunched up into each other trying to get the hell out. That isn't where these bodies are. They're lying all over the room. Which means what? They were dead already. They were knocked out by the gas that was put in before the fire was started. They were tied up or somehow unable to move. But we don't know, because they did to Waco what they did to the first attack on MOVE. When I was in Philadelphia, they surrounded MOVE for a month. They created a police state in the neighborhood. You had to have special police ID to go in and out of your house. They took this whole multi-ethnic and student community and surrounded it with fence. They had SWAT teams on the roof. They had 24-hour police surveillance. They turned it into a fascist state. Okay, the press were not allowed in. They only got pictures because they had hidden these buildings. And what did they do after they came out? And they said that, you know, this cop died. It doesn't matter that the bullet that hit the cop came from behind and to the left, you know, or over to his, you know, and hit him in the back. It must have come out of the house because those MOVE people, you know, they're well armed. And they must have hit him. And what's he doing up there? He's 56 years old. He's about to retire in 3 months. His name is James Ramp. He's an old desk cop on the police force, and he's the lead guy on the hose? I mean, tell me they weren't trying to get rid of that pension. Put him in front of the line of fire and then hit him from the back from the SWAT team on the roof. Now we got them all. Convict all the MOVE members of shooting him. That's a good trick. I mean, Hercule Poirot couldn't even do that one. You know, everybody's convicted of the same murder. You know, they beat the hell out of them, and then they find, of course, a big arsenal of guns. Well, they got plenty of guns in the police department to put on the table for you to take a photograph of. You know, and then they bring in something. You ever heard of this? A special police demolition team. Any police people here? Is there such a thing? A special police demolition team? You ever hear that? That's what they called it, Philadelphia. What is it? It's an earth mover. And it demolished the MOVE house. You see, when they killed Newton, or I'm sorry, not Newton, when Mark Clark and Fred Hampton from the Black Panthers in Chicago, there were some people who knew about ballistics, and they went in the house with ballistic rods, and they put the rods through the holes, and they did the analysis, and they found that 6 shots came out and 400 shots went in. And that the 400 shots started before the 6 shots. Okay? You can do that with ballistics, with science and that sort of thing. We couldn't do any ballistics on the MOVE house because there wasn't a MOVE house. 48 hours after they arrest everybody, the MOVE house is a lot. And what's Waco now? You just put the dirt on top of it. That's the end of that story. All these people in Cameroon die suddenly. 10,000 people die because some gas comes up off a lake and kills everybody for a mile around. You know, it's not a couple people up in the air. The gas doesn't go anywhere. It's just solid. You know, all these people are dead. You can't get near them. The Armed Forces Institute of Pathology and the CDC rush in, the same crisis team. Get these people on the ground. They're all buried by the time the press gets anywhere near it. Everybody's in the ground, so there was this gas that came off the lake. I looked through all the scientific literature. I found one instance where some gas supposedly came out of a lake and caused some, you know, leaves on the sides. The fish died. And we're talking thousands of people that died of this gas. Can't they run? You know, isn't there a difference? Gas rise or fall? How does the gas stay at the bottom of the lake? They said it was volcanic activity. They had an international meeting of scientists. Nobody can figure out what happened. There wasn't any volcanic activity. They said, well, maybe the gas was just at the bottom of the lake for a long time, and suddenly the lake turned over and the gas came up. Try and keep an air bubble at the bottom of your glass for a while. You know, but the gas just hung around till it was time to come up and kill all the people, and then there wasn't any hope, okay? The people that survived in the neighborhood heard jet planes fly over, and they heard explosions at 2 in the morning. But never mind that. That probably is what shook up the gas. You know, but we don't get to do autopsies anymore. We didn't get to do any autopsies on the Jonestown bodies. They were taken to Dover. And they were buried. The children were buried and the bodies were burned. You know, the families couldn't get anywhere near them. You know, they said they were too decomposed. Well, by 6 days, yeah, a lot of them were, to identify or to autopsy. The American College of Pathologists wrote an open letter to the Army saying you didn't even do a fluid test on site. All you have to do is take a fluid test of the body and you can tell several common causes of death. You certainly could tell a cyanide death with a blood or body fluid test. Did they do it? No. And you know what they said? They said that we flew out there, this crisis team, we forgot our medical bags. We flew out there because Dr. Mutu asked them for help. Well, the crisis team that came with them from Israel to the scene in Cameroon left Cameroon before the incident was reported to the government in Cameroon. In other words, there was a guy that found it in the next morning, and he's on a little moped, and he drives down into the city, but it takes him a couple hours, and he says, hey, all these people are dead out there. But before he can report it, the doctors from Israel come to help. And Israel reestablished military relations with Cameroon that day. Okay. They had been secretly training the Cameroon military and those units that went up there to bury the bodies for 3 years. They weren't admitting the connection. And that guy Vanunu that's in jail in Israel, believe me, I'm not singling out Israel, but this is the evidence that I found. I mean, Israel, I don't think, operates separate from the U.S., or what we want to do. We're the world powers. They're not some huge lion of a country that just bullies everybody around. They're a little tiny operation, but they were involved in this thing, and this guy Vanunu said, and they were going to be, I think, kind of a landing strip for us in the Middle East for war until we decided Saudi Arabia had more oil, and basically abandoned them. But they said that, you know, this guy Vanunu, they locked him up, and he said not only were they making nuclear weapons, but that they had neutron bombs. So my friend Mae Brussell, who Cheyenne mentioned earlier, she said, well, I think it was a test of a neutron bomb. Now, it's right on the border with Chad. To this day, no one is allowed back into that area. I think there's some mineral rich or something in that area that they want. They wiped the people out, buried it, and that's the end of it. They were not friendly with the government. They were a separate religious group up in the hills there. They'd been independent for a long time. I think they were an expendable group, and so they went in, and it was a good way to test the bomb and see what it would do. The animals are all dead, the people are all dead, the buildings are all standing, so I think it worked, and I think they tested a neutron bomb. So I said, well, maybe so, you know. I mean, it seemed a little outrageous to me, but a year later, I'm reading this article in the Boston Globe, and it's a story of how the nefarious Soviet intelligence plant false stories around the world. And here's how they do it. First, they go to a Soviet contact or control agent that they've infiltrated into a regular paper somewhere like the Scimitar in Istanbul. And they give him the phony story. And he, being a good commie agent, prints it in the paper. And once it's in the paper, it goes out over the wire nationally, and then it's picked up by TASS or the Soviet news agencies. It's spread all over as news from Turkey, so it doesn't look like it came from them. And then it gets all over the world, and it gets picked up by the U.S. press, and it's believed, and it's disinformation. Now, the reason we could describe this so thoroughly in the Boston Globe, I hate to tell you, is that that's how we do it. That's how we plant the disinformation stories. But what was interesting to me about this article is they gave examples of some of the stories that these horrible Soviets had planted. And that while rational people like us here in the United States would never believe this sort of drivel, people in third world countries are obviously much stupider than we are. We're able to buy these kind of ideas. Jonestown, they said, was a CIA operation, a mind control and a massacre. That's Soviet disinformation. They said children were being stolen in Central America for prostitution and for body parts. These are the Soviet disinformation stories, so you don't get excited. Okay, and Israel tested a neutron bomb in Cameroon. Now, the only researchers anywhere that I talked to a lot of them, I see all the right wing and the left wing, that was even talking about such a crazy idea as a neutron bomb in Cameroon were Mae Brussell and I. So either we've got to be part of the Soviet disinformation structure, which I mean, I don't even speak Russian. I don't know any Russians real well, you know, in my life. you know, if I am, I must be an unwitting programmed agent of this stuff, or maybe these are true stories that the Boston Globe was using this clever cover story to discredit. And wouldn't that be the way you do the mirror, is turn it around on the real stuff and say that that's the lie? I think so. I think you give the credible person the false information to spread, and you give the less than credible person the real information to spread. And then neither one gets believed. Okay? Or if the credible one gets believed, you've got the disinformation out there. But these things were not at all what they seem. Most of the stories that I've followed, I mean, there's a story going on now that has to do with, there's so many, I mean, in the press, but this one has to do with suicides in the military. And when we went in to do the otherwise harmless invasion of Haiti, we ran into an unexpected problem. Here it is. Troop suicides alarming Pentagon. Did anyone see this article or anything about it? 3 people, for some unknown reason, in the military committed suicide. I don't want to upset any of you, but hundreds of people commit suicide in the military, many of them in basic training. Much of it is covered up. There's one group, 2,000 families, still trying to find out how their sons and daughters died. I just ran into a woman from the Soviet Union who said there's a similar rate of death going on there in the Soviet Union, in the military, that's not being, you know, they're being given false explanations about the deaths of their kids. So they cover up suicide, or death is also a cover for covert operations in the military. You tell a family that somebody's dead, and then you can use them from then on in covert intelligence operations. All right. Any of you remember the Mayaguez incident? When this ship was in offshore Cambodia and they captured the ship for a period of time and everybody got upset, and Ford sent in some Marines and the Marines all died in the raid, okay, trying to save the ship, and the ship came. And the ship was going into protected area. They know they were not in international waters anymore. They said that the CIA forgot to remind them that they shouldn't go into this area. Okay, and then it came out after they were arrested, this was a spy ship. It was on a spy mission and it got caught, you know, and there was all this flap. But at the time it was those horrible Cambodians bullying us Americans around, and how dare they take one of our ships, and good reason to start a war. So the night of it, I'm living in Philadelphia, and they have this woman on the news, and she's crying, you know, that's my husband. I haven't heard from him in 15 years. I thought he was dead. The captain of the ship is this woman's husband, and she heard from the military that he had died. He's the captain of a spy ship in Cambodia who supposedly died in Vietnam 15 years before, and she hasn't heard anything from him. You know, I don't mean to shock you. Not all husbands like their wives. And a lot of them would like an excuse. Take a walk, and this is a simple one, and they used hundreds of people like this. They gave them false identities, and they used them in those secret wars in Laos and Cambodia. Much of that has to do with either AWOLs or these people that assume second jobs, is what they covered up not only by deaths, but by the whole MIA POW flap, is to cover up covert operations and covert use of the troops. It's not that we have thousands of MIAs and POWs languishing in little bamboo prisons in Vietnam, despite what Bo Greitz will tell you, or anybody else, H. Ross Perot. The reality is they're manipulating these families, and they have been from the first, emotionally, to get them to believe that, you know, the government's covering it all up. They're covering that all up like they cover up UFOs. It's their secret, and they cover it up. And the cover-up is part of the game. So they have these people that you think are dead, or you don't know what happened because they won't tell you. So here's this story. 3 people have killed themselves, and the military wants to find out about suicide. Then somebody sends me this. Relatives and friends doubt that Ponce native killed self. This is from Florida. That's one of the guys, and he says, this is a family. He sounded content, and he told me he wanted to come to New York on leave in about a month and a half. This is the brother. He spoke to him Saturday morning. Sounded normal the day before. He didn't commit suicide. Someone killed him, said the brother. He said his brother had mentioned that he saw a Haitian man kill another and then disarmed the assassin. He was a little nervous telling the story. The mother wouldn't take the flag from the military. They want the incident investigated. So I'm telling you, you get stories, and you can't just buy the first thing that you read. I mean, we spend all this time trying to get out the information that exists from former agents about Oliver North's role in the drug traffic. And it's quite an extensive role. It's not just a matter of they overlooked some drugs. It goes quite a bit beyond that, but you can't get it out. Sometimes it gets, here's LA Times. This is Sunday, October 30th, 1994. We're going to finally admit that the official history details a covert CIA role in Indonesia. And you know how old this story is for anybody that studies intelligence and the genocide that they created in Indonesia? But now finally we have an official record of it, so eventually you can get it. Or here's another death that happened around me. Secret of building revealed. There was a security guard killed in this building in the Virginia suburbs, and I got articles, I clipped articles in the Time, and it didn't make any sense, and they said, well, maybe she killed herself, or maybe a burglar killed her, or something. You know what building this was, it turns out? It was that NRO building, the National Reconnaissance Organization, that caused all the flap because the CIA had a secret building that the Congress supposedly didn't know anything about. This is all phony, too, because the Congress did know about it, and they're just coming up with a reason to kick the CIA one more time. I'm no friend of the CIA, but neither is the FBI and the Defense Intelligence. Okay, and the CIA is in for the lumps right now, and so we're going to get anti-CIA stories for a while from the other guys. But here's this woman. She worked there, and what's the company that owns the building? Anyone know? Rockwell International is the overall corporate, but where do the rent checks go to? Anyone know? Where the rent checks that pay for the secret national NRO, these initials were secret up until a few years ago. This is the agency that analyzes all the satellite photos, and they can see a golf ball and a license plate and your cheeks or anything else they want to see from a satellite. They can now, with computer enhancement, see through cloud cover. But in the old days, they had to put flying saucers up to see through cloud cover. And so they don't have to use remotely piloted vehicles or over horizon stuff. They can see you right down from the satellite, and they can get all the detail you want. I saw one of their phony exhibits out at the aptly titled Allen W. Dulles International Airport a month ago when I was out there for a flight, and they had an exhibit, what you can see from a satellite. And they show these grainy pictures, you know, and you can't quite make anything out. But the one that interested me is this nice glossy, and it showed these buildings and a couple of trucks where, in Cuba, at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is one of the photos that convinced the president and U.S. intelligence that the Soviet Union must have planted missiles there in Cuba. And at the bottom, typed in, this is an original old glossy they've got for this exhibit. You know, the U-2 sees missiles in Cuba. Typed in at the bottom, courtesy of Jagger Childs Stovall. That ring a bell with anybody? That's where a Navy intelligence guy named Lee Harvey Oswald worked, where everybody had to have a security clearance, where they did photo analysis. And Oswald used to go over to the Saul Bloom agency where they had better cameras, and they subcontracted to Saul Bloom and blew up the photos and did photo work over there. Okay? And here's this picture from the year that when he was working there of the missiles in Cuba come directly from Jagger Childs Stovall from the shop he was working in. I don't know if they came from Oswald, but they certainly came from the people around him. I thought it was interesting. This is what you can see from a satellite. But what you can really see is a great deal more. So this building is built, and it's all hush-hush, and they send the checks to cover it up to a company called Collins Communications. Used to be Collins Radio, now a subdivision in Richardson, Texas. I don't know where that is, but there's a company out here that was getting the CIA checks for the NRO building where this woman was killed. And, you know, it has to do with a family named Byrd that owned the Texas School Book Depository. And they tried to look at the North Pole. That family has something to do with Collins Radio. And there were people around Collins Radio in terms of the major characters in the Kennedy assassination. And they were, in fact, in charge of all the communications with Air Force One on the day of the Kennedy assassination. Collins Radio was the subcontract agency through Station Liberty. You can look at the transcripts that have come out now, and there's contact back and forth between the plane and Station Liberty. That's the transfer station run by Collins for all the radio traffic that day of the assassination. So this is Collins, and they're taking the checks out here. So I'm just trying to tell you, there's more behind a story. We had another guy locally, one of these coroners. He's the guy that did the Vincent Foster work. The autopsy work on Vincent Foster, the friend of Bill Clinton who killed himself. You know, they all kill themselves. So he killed himself, you know, and there were some questions. It looked like the body had been moved. It didn't seem like the gun was in the right position in his hand, but these were all cleared up by a special prosecutor. We have special prosecutors. In fact, there's about 24 of them. Now they got a new one. Dash, notable Democrat, joins Whitewater probers. He's going to look into it. Samuel Dash, anyone remember him? Legal staff investigating Whitewater, was the chief counsel of the Senate Watergate Committee. You see, once you learn how to do it, then you can do it again. So then they say in the Post, they got about 20 guys that are qualified to be special prosecutors, and that's it. Okay, so if you want to do Contragate, you get Lawrence Walsh. Except some dumb press guy says, well, Mr. Walsh, wasn't it your law firm? It says here in the contract for Southern Air Transport that was taking the weapons down to the Contra, that it was your law firm that drew up their government contracts. Is there a conflict of interest? And Walsh says, no, of course there's no conflict of interest. Well, he's right, there isn't any. If it was an honest lawyer, there'd be a conflict of interest. But it's the same interest. So you get them, and they come in there, and they do these phony scandals. But here's this guy, Vince Foster, and somebody wrote an article in the Washington Times, and they say, well, this guy is not too good. He's 76 years old. He's had a stroke. He's not functioning too well. He's a college student. The family says the guy says he committed suicide. The family doesn't believe it. It's American suicide. And so they're questioning him. He's got 3 or 4 other cases. And then it says last year he ruled that Mr. Foster, the White House deputy counsel, shot himself despite evidence that raised questions about that finding. Dr. Byers' verdict was upheld by federal investigators. So a friend of his gets upset that they're criticizing his friend in the paper, and he writes into the Washington Times. He gets a letter in. He says, how can you say this about the good Dr. Byer? He has a professional background. He worked, and we're told now, he worked as a consultant to the Department of Defense in evaluating Vietnam War injuries, and he helped design a combat book used in Vietnam that saved many soldiers from injury, and he has been a consultant to CBS News on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So he's qualified, at least to tell us that there was a lone assassin. So that's some of the news. We're probably running out of time for questions, but I wanted to just give you a feel for some of the stuff that I work on. And there are these other deaths, but I did exhaustive work on Reagan's death, and I found that Brady beat him to the hospital. Brady was the first guy in on the stretcher, flat, which is with confusion about whether he was standing or flat. That's Brady. He beat him by at least 15 minutes. Reagan is clearly hit. He's shown in Time magazine. He raises his left arm. His cheeks puff out like Connolly. His hair is mussed. His shoulders droop. His lung is collapsing, edema from the lung, blowing out the cheeks. Time magazine, everybody else, Reagan is hit. The problem is that when he's got his left arm up, waving to the press, Mr. Reagan, that's when Brady's being shot. That's when Hinkley's bullet is hitting Brady. Then it hits Delahanty, and it spins him around and throws him to the ground. It blows Brady's brains out. It hits McCarthy, the Secret Service guy. It raises him in the air, 160 pounds from the back door of the car. He lands by the front bumper. This is a 22, remember. Not a first. The first of 38 that he bought where? On Elm Street in Dallas, Texas. At first it's identified as a 38, then as a 22 later on. And I actually, by going over ABC footage, found the switch. I can see the Secret Service agent drop the 20, pick up the 38, and another guy, another DC cop, drop the 22. You can see it in the footage, okay? But the official weapon is 22 by the time they're finished. But meanwhile, this little 22 is knocking everybody silly, okay? There's a hole in the Universal building across the street. There's a nick in the windshield of the back windshield of the car, and then there's supposed to be the nearly fatal bullet to Reagan. They say, the official version, it hits the car, and then it flattens a little and zoops to the right. It ricochets off the car, and it goes between the hole open from the back door, and Reagan's being pushed into the car at that point, and it comes in under here, and that's how it gets him. Okay? And that's the official story, except when you look at all the photographs of the back of the car, there's a hole into the trunk. There's not a little mark of a bullet scratching something. There's an open hole going into the trunk from that bullet. The other problem is that Reagan is already hit clearly. He's already reacting before he's pushed into the car. He's pushed into the car completely by the time of the sound of the last shot. You can hear 7 shots from a 6-shot gun. Okay, and Reagan's already all the way in the car, and then they do the autopsy interview. You remember the autopsy interviews here from Parkland, where the doctors, they said, well, he had this entrance hole in his neck, and they said, well, but Oswald was in the building behind. How did they shoot him? And the doctors were showing how he might have been turned backward in his chair, so he was looking around completely the other way. So you get the first thing, the doctors are there, and they're telling you what's the direction of the shot and the truth about what they see when they get him in there and realize that he's been shot. And they say a downward angle, 45 degrees. Back to front, left to right. Enters in the back, almost hits the aorta, bounces off the 7th rib instead and goes into the lung. All right? So you have this shot from above and to the left and behind him. Hinkley is down in your position, not quite so low, shooting, in that case, it would have been upward into the armpit. Now you're taught in police school or anywhere else, even if you've got a bulletproof vest on, that you don't raise your arms because the fatal shot can go in at the armpit. So you pick your arms up like this when you shoot. So he's already compromised, he's got his arm up, but Secret Service, just like in Dallas, isn't doing what it's supposed to. When they come, they do it. They pull up to the door. You know, you rent a limousine, call up and rent a limousine. Does it park at the guy's door down the block or does it come to your door? Now you're the president, you own the limousine, you got the whole Secret Service involved. Where does it go? It goes to the door and they'll repark it 6 inches to make sure it's lined up with the door. So they show up at the VIP entrance to the hotel and they do it right. They pull up directly by the door, the Secret Service get out, not Reagan, the Secret Service get out. They form 2 lines on either side going into the hotel. So you got a body block on both sides. You got this little coupler device up above. He's protected. Then they open the door and zip, and he goes. That's security. When he comes out, where's the car? 40 feet down the pavement, nowhere near the door. Where's the motorcade cops? Sitting on their motorcycles, nowhere near. Okay. Where's the Secret Service? Behind him. They file out behind Reagan, and they all go to his right like a line of ducks. Not a single one on the left. They're supposed to, at least if he's going to go toward the crowd, surround him like a diamond. There's none of them there. They're all on the right. The only people on the left are Brady and Deaver who don't know what's going on, and they're walking into the line of Hinkley's fire. Reagan's compromised. He's out in the open. He's walking into an open area. Now you can shoot him. Nobody's in the way except these cops and the other people like Brady, you know. But Hinkley's just there to pull the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. He's not there to do the shooting. The shooter is up above. Okay, and they hit him with this thing, but it doesn't quite do the job. So they push him into the limousine, and they yell, "Rawhide is okay." That's the wrong message. Rawhide's supposed to be dead. Rawhide is okay, and we're going to go to blank, and they give a code word in the book. The Secret Service agent writes, and they don't want to tell you the code word for the White House, so he just says code word, but he says it means, it means White House. We're turning right, we're going to go to the White House. Well, if you drive up T Street like the car did, to the point when they said that, and you turn right, you're not going to the White House. The White House is down and to the left. If the president is shot, you're going to go to GWU. If you want to go to GWU, you get on Florida Avenue and you go over to 23rd and you cut down the circle and you're there in 2 minutes. They don't go on Florida Avenue, they say. They go down Connecticut and they get all the way down to DuPont Circle and they go under DuPont Circle in a tunnel and then they notice he's coughing up blood. Did they go to the hospital then? Oh no. Why bother? It's just the president. He's coughing up a little blood. No, no one knows what's wrong. Because you come out of DuPont Circle, you can take M Street to 23rd, and you're over there a minute and a half. They don't bother. They go on for the White House. You know, the president's shot. Let's get to the White House. So they drive all the way down 17th Street. They go around Lafayette Park. Then they make a right on Pennsylvania, just so we can see the White House one last time, I guess. And then they drive up Pennsylvania like it's 3 sides of a triangle up to 23rd Street, and then back up to the Circle, and then into GWU. But even that was 5 minutes. I've driven it. It isn't 15 minutes. The first guy there, even though he was lying on the ground for 5 minutes before an ambulance could get to him, is Brady. There's no Reagan. Reagan's no place to be seen. Reagan goes right, up Connecticut, northwest. Know where it goes? Bethesda Naval Hospital. Scene of the famous JFK autopsy. They were taking him to Bethesda in the car. He's wounded. They're going to finish the job. He's not supposed to survive. A huge fight breaks out between the Bush and the Reagan loyalists inside the White House. When Reagan gets to the hospital later, the first thing out of his mouth, he says, "Get me the demographics on that kid." He's talking about John W. Hinckley Jr. Well, John W. Hinckley Jr. comes from Colorado Springs, just like this guy that did the semi-automatic in front of the White House. It's a coincidence, though. The other day, and he comes from there, and he's got a psychiatrist named Rappaport, and he has a father named John W. Hinckley Sr. And John W. Hinckley Sr. owns an oil company called Vanderbilt Oil. Only now it's Vanderbilt Resources. It was Vanderbilt Oil in the 60s. It had 4 dry wells. It was making $6 million a year somehow off of 4 dry wells, and then suddenly it started to go bankrupt, and it got bailed out by another oil company called Zapata Offshore Oil. It's owned by a guy named George Herbert Walker Bush, who happened to be a neighbor of John W. Hinckley Sr. In fact, that evening, there was going to be a dinner which got canceled due to the inconvenience of the incident, I suppose. It got canceled, a dinner between Scott Hinckley, the older son, and Neil Bush, an older son in that family. We're going to have dinner. Now, if I told you Robert Oswald, Lee's older brother, was going to have dinner on November 22nd with Linda Bird Johnson, would you get the message? But in the press, it's reported correctly. It's reported, and this is the word. You want to watch for the word for conspiracy in the press? This is the word. It's ironic. That's conspiracy in press talk. It's ironic. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm an irony theorist. All right? It's ironic that these two were going to meet and have dinner. It's ironic that the two families knew each other, that the Bushes bailed out the Hinkleys, that Scott Hinckley's dating arrangements were made by Bush's daughter. Everywhere Reagan would have looked, he would have seen Bush behind that shooting. And the father is the head of an interesting organization run by the right wing since the 1950s, Christian evangelists, supposedly helping people around the world in refugee communities. I suggest doing something else by the name of World Vision. He's on the board of directors of World Vision. World Vision has taken funds from the CIA. World Vision is in charge of refugees in Sabra and Shatila when the fascist Falange killed the Palestinians. They're in charge of the refugee camps in the Honduras border where the Contras are recruited by the CIA. They're in charge of the Haitian and Cuban refugee camps in Indiantown Gap and down in Miami that revolted because of their treatment. You know who they brought in? This subcontracting Christian agency brought in to run the camps with them for the Cubans? 2 groups named Alpha 66 and Omega 7. The most anti-Castro, anti-communist, reactionary, murderous groups in the country, CIA henchmen from the time of the Bay of Pigs and the time they left Cuba to the current day. Murderers, killers brought into those camps to give political education to those Cubans, to recruit them into assassination and anti-Castro activities and a new invasion of Cuba. And if they balked, I was told by other legitimate refugee help agencies, if they balked, they were beaten or they were refused food. That's why they rioted. They were in charge, World Vision, of the Thai refugee camps in Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. And one of the people that was running around in their T-shirt and working for them with those refugees in the years when Hinckley Sr. was there on the board of directors was a funny character by the name of Mark David Chapman, who's the known assassin of John Lennon. Of course, why would they shoot John Lennon, a person who could bring 1 million people into the street with an anti-war message? He's just some songster who got off of heroin after 5 years. Why bother with killing him? Why bother with killing anybody that makes a message? Why'd they bother in Weimar Republic of Germany and killing a musician? Why'd they bother to cut off the hands of the Cuban revolutionary singers so that they couldn't stroke the guitar or cut their tongues out so that they couldn't sing any longer? Why bother? Because they can't stand the noise. They can't stand the dissidents. They can't stand anybody to have a different opinion. That's why. And so here's the father with this training ground for assassins, recruitment and training ground, under the cover of a missionary operation. Ever hear of Albert Osborne, John Howard Bowen, Mexico, Oaxaca, a missionary front for an assassination training camp for a triangulation of fire in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd? A missionary cover for an intelligence and assassin operation. They worked in Laos, they worked in Cambodia, and Vietnam for the CIA, spying on the population there. That's who the father is. That's what the demographics are. So I say yes, you got a shot from the bushy knoll. A bunch of bushes up on the retaining wall. And now you can't do it because they built a garage over the whole area. If you ever go down by the Sheraton there, they don't have a little couple anymore. They got a garage. You pull into the completely closed off garage so nobody can do it again. Okay, but they take Hinkley as the patsy who doesn't fire the shot and rush him off, and they take Reagan toward Bethesda, and then they have a big fight in the Situation Room, and somebody decides that Reagan can live. And they turn the car around and take him back to GWU, and Haig emerges, Bush's friend, and says, gentlemen, I am in charge here until the vice president returns. And that's right, and the vice president is in charge from then on for 3 terms of government. When he debates Dukakis, he says, I've unleashed the Bush family on America. When he leaves office the day of the Clinton inauguration, he says, I'll give him a year and I'm coming back. Okay. Reagan got messages beyond that point that he wasn't president any longer. The day of the second inauguration, he wouldn't come out. He said it was too cold. He hired 14,000 police to guard him that day. He had not only concrete stanchions in front of the White House, he had barbed wire and sandbags on the top of the White House. He had a guy hired all day to stand next to him with a surface-to-air missile. He had a podium with a glass-proof front. He sealed every manhole cover up and down the street. I'll show you the Washington Post article. I'm not making this up. He closed all the windows in all the buildings. He still wouldn't come out. He knew what was waiting out there. He'd take off in the presidential helicopter from his ranch, and a plane would almost run into it. And the guy'd say, oh, I dropped my contacts, but he just happened to be flying. And they said he was in Army, he was AWOL. And they're dragging him off. He's AWOL. He said, I'm not AWOL, they're embarrassed. You think the guy's crazy, or he's not AWOL and they're embarrassed? He was flying a guy to meet with Donald Nixon, Nixon's brother. But it's just a coincidence, you see. I mean, it's nothing to do with Reagan, all these different times that they come after him. So it's the day of the second inauguration. He got all these cops ready to protect him. He still won't come out of the White House. And that day, what happens in front of the White House? The Marine Corps band go in, and a guy in civilian clothes walks in with them, and nobody notices that he's walking in. You're in the middle of the Marine Corps band. What do? Doot, doot, doot. You're in civilian clothes. You don't have any ID. You do something in front of the White House, they recognize you 3 years later. They got all the pictures. You don't come near. You go to one gate of the White House, and you say, I want to see the president, and they refuse you. You go to the next gate and say, I want to see the president. They send you to St. E's, to St. Elizabeth, the psychiatric hospital. They have 120 or 130 cases a year. They call them White House cases, and they have an actual diagnosis at St. E's. You are delusional because you think the President of the United States wants to help you. This is in writing. You cannot go and mess around in front of the White House. You cannot fly a plane into the front of the White House. You cannot empty a semi-automatic weapon and have the Secret Service wait for the pedestrians to come up and stop you. You can't do that stuff. And so the day that he puts 14,000 cops out, this guy's allowed to walk in. He goes up to the bedroom. He goes up to the dining room. He's in all the private areas of the Reagans. And then he's escorted out by the Secret Service. The message is, go ahead and put 14,000 cops around you, because when you go get your jammies, we're going to have a little boy in there with a pop gun. That's all. Just stay in line. The night that they go to see the Queen, they're all excited. The Reagans, the Queen, the royalty, you know. They're staying at Buckingham Palace. Do you remember a guy climbed over the walls and came into the Queen's bedroom and sat on her bed that night? Sat on her bed. You can see it in your bed in the middle of the night. That's it. I'm sorry, you're gone. You don't have no security. And who was he? Just some schmuck off the street? No, he's the nephew of Rudolf Hess, the guy locked up in Spandau, the Nazi war criminal, if in fact it's him. The family says it's him, but the people that look at him say it isn't. But it'd be in the family's interest if he's loose to say it. The double's in there, you know, yeah, that's him, we know him real well. These things don't happen randomly. You know, they say, well, we couldn't detect it because it was flying below tree level. You know, the plane comes in. He takes off from Baltimore. He steals a plane. Doesn't anybody notice? There's the tower. Hey, Fred, there goes another one. Who you think's in that one? Anybody call an alert? Starts heading for Washington. Hey, stolen plane on the way. Nah, nothing. Just off on a joyride. Where's he come from? The VA psychiatric ward. Marries the VA psychiatric nurse, lives on the VA grounds, military background, obviously open for programming. Oh, lone nut, suicidal. Okay, lone nut, suicidal, flies down into D.C., can't see him below tree level. I said, boy, I know how to invade Haiti. We get 80 guys out of the psychiatric ward at the VA, we give them Piper Cubs, and they fly below tree level, no known defense. And they smash into Cedrus's palace, and the whole thing is over. Then later we get the other official story. Oh, it was on the radar. We had on the radar, but that was between 2 and 3 in the morning when we do other things besides look at the radar. All right, it's a lone nut and nobody's looking at the radar. Do you feel safer about the president now? It doesn't matter to me if it's a setup. He doesn't have any security. If they can't stop a plane from coming to your damn front door, what did they say? At the time we saw the plane, the Secret Service said all we could do was duck. This guy's emptying a semi-automatic weapon and the pedestrians turn around when the clip goes and get him. What are the Secret Service doing? That guy's got a damn gun. They said, you know, didn't bother the president. He was safe over at the Blair House. At the Blair House, you better talk to Harry Truman. He's safe over at the Blair House, you know. And then they said, and it's not bothering him, he's going out to the Ford Theater tonight. How many messages do you need in one day? He's going to the Ford Theater tonight. You know, I said, well, he's not courageous to go out, he's courageous to come home. The message is, why don't you stay over there at the Blair House, Mr. President? You're safer over there. Things are under control here. No need to come back. Just go to Camp David and watch some movies. Meese testifies. All of the main people in the Tower Commission testify. A finding was signed by the president on July the 15th, 1985, to send the first TOW missiles in exchange for the hostages through Israel into Iran. They all give the same date. So I pull out my Reagan file and say, geez, what was Reagan doing that day? Lo and behold, Reagan is having a little problem with health. He's having prostate surgery for 8 hours on July 15, 1985. And they had to put in an acting president by the name of George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush signed the finding. North, Bush's boy, destroyed the findings so that we'd never know. Reagan couldn't remember because he never did it. Reagan is set up and pushed out by the scandal, the same way they set everything else up. You know, Jack Anderson tells us that Bush was around that day, but he fell during playing tennis and hit his head, and so he slept the rest of the day. Yeah. And then we didn't have any president at all. You know, we didn't have an acting president. Who needs a president? Well, not them. So, I mean, to me, it's just, at some point, you got to get the message they want us to get. The message that they've leaked out over all these years, that 85, 90% of the public know, is that there was a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy at the highest levels of government. That's their message. We don't know it because we figured it out. A lot of people believe it. Few people know it. Hardly anyone studies it. But we know it. We believe it. It's the majority view that came from then. What's the message? Yeah, we killed the son of a bitch. What do you want to do about it? We can kill the president. We can sure as hell kill you. So sit down, shut up, keep quiet, consume, and die. But I got the other message. They go to these links of control of the brain, of assassination, of covert operations, because they're afraid. They're not afraid of the third world. They do genocide there. They're not afraid of the Soviet Union. You go in the Soviet Union now and you look. You've got a third world country at best. I mean, totally debilitated economy that was barely keeping up militarily with anything we were doing. We were way ahead of them. Okay? It was all a game. There wasn't any threat from there. We're the threat. The American people is the enemy. I remember Oliver North saying, yeah, the Contras knew, the Nicaraguans knew, everybody all over the world knew, but the Americans didn't know. We don't want to tell the Americans. Because we're it. We're the last enemy they've got. It's that space between our ears that's so precious to them, because if we use it instead of them, if we turn around and say no, then the gig is up. There isn't any more game. As long as we're hooked on their needle, on their commoditization, on their addictions, on everything else, as long as we will agree to be afraid of each other, as long as we'll agree to be a little privileged over the other guy, which is the real violence of society, to separate each other by gender, by race, by class, as long as we'll be afraid and let them tell us what to do, as long as we won't tell each other the story of our own lives, which is where I get this truth, from my mothers, from my uncles, from the people who come to me after lectures. This is how I know these things, besides reading the papers. People come and tell me. And if they told each other, the game would be over. Because they are afraid of the tremendous power that we have to be a democracy.
And now it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome back John Judge for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks. I had asked Al Navis to join me. He's a longtime Kennedy researcher and knows the case more thoroughly than and so if you have specific questions around Kennedy, he also agreed to try and answer some of those. And Cheyenne said I didn't talk enough about Mae Brussell. I loved Mae. She was a mentor of mine. She was an independent researcher. She was part of the Housewives group with Lillian Castellano and Sylvia Marr and these other women that right at the time in the early 60s began to clip papers and study what was out there, and they got their own Warren reports and they did the work, and they were really the mainstay of all the early research. The men got published and the women didn't get the credit, but women were the backbone of the early research, and they were the ones that helped to guide Garrison in his investigation, and the directions he took in large part came from Mae. She was independent, she was feisty, she was the daughter of the I. Magnin family in Los Angeles, one of the main reform rabbis in Los Angeles, and the I. Magnin department stores. They sold it, but they had millions in the family, and they were friends with Richard Nixon and all the people she would talk about in her weekly tapes. She did World Watchers because she wanted to be like Weight Watchers and have women get the tapes each week and talk about them over the coffee klatch. And she broke down the news of the week. She read and clipped 15 newspapers a day, 150 periodicals a month, and close to 3,000 books a year. And I couldn't in my wildest dreams hold a candle to this woman. But she did 758 weekly tapes where she broke down the news and made the connections over all those years from the time of the Kennedy assassination up to the current day. And we would work together. On Jonestown, when I got into it, I sent her a list about 2 weeks in, 80 different reasons I thought modus operandi for an intelligence operation. The next 2 days, she sent me back 130 reasons that she had found. So she was always ahead of me, and she died of a very short-term cancer. We don't know if it was induced. It was after the death of both of her parents. There were suspicious circumstances surrounding it. But Mae Brussell was not a psychic, but she was able, by thoroughly studying the information, seeing the newspapers from all over the country, to see things happening. And she called Mary Jo Kopechne's mother 3 days before the Chappaquiddick incident, which was staged, and said, "They are about to kill your daughter." She passed a note to Rose Kennedy 5 days before the assassination of Robert Kennedy and said, "The forces that killed John are moving on your son in Los Angeles." Not because she had a crystal ball, but because she knew their names. She saw how they moved, and that's what we did. We studied it at the nut and bolt level, at the schlepper level, who carried the money, and these guys would show up again and again and again in all the operations, the same names and agencies. And she was able then, she used to laugh and say to me that she shouldn't put out that she was a researcher, that she should say she was a psychic. And then she could say all the things, and people would love her because she had predicted, you know, like the phony psychic Gene Dixon. Penn Jones said that Gene Dixon would hang around with H.L. Hunt here in Dallas. And she said, "Do you think a guy as rich as H.L. Hunt would go get a 2-bit psychic to tell him what's going on? Don't you think it's the other way around?" And she's the one that predicted Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, you know. And I had this one woman who I think really had some psychic abilities, and she said to me, "How can a psychic be a Republican?" And but Mae used to laugh about that, and I loved her, and we would call back and talk about these morbid things, I guess, to most people. You know, they said Freddie Prinze during his suicide, and again, there's bullet problems and everything else, a leading Hispanic spokesman on TV, about the only one at the time, they said that he had committed suicide in Time magazine because he had a morbid fascination with death. And you know what the evidence was? He kept looking at the Zapruder film. That's a morbid fascination with the wrong death. I got that same one. I keep looking at that film, and I keep seeing something important happening in it, you know, and it's about the only film that we've had, and it took years and years for it to get out. But I just want to say, Mae left her collection to me. I tried to build a research center. There was too much contention around her and other people that were jealous of it, and they didn't want to do the work, but they wanted the collection, and so I finally just abandoned it, much to my chagrin, because I think it's the most important anti-fascist collection in the country. It's going to be renewed and reestablished sometime soon in Santa Barbara, California, and it's a very important collection. I tried to transcribe her tapes so that we could get into them, like they did with the Edgar Casey talks that he gave in trance. out at ARE in Virginia, Research and Enlightenment. They just took all of his talks and they indexed them all, and then they can write Edgar Cayce on Atlantis or Edgar Cayce on Diet. You've seen these paperbacks. Well, the same thing could have been done. Mae Brussell on the rifle, Mae Brussell on the second Oswald, Mae Brussell on all the different things that she researched, but she knew them inside out, and she would peg them each week, and she'd be, you could take her last tapes now, and she died in 1988. You could take her last month of tapes, and she would be talking about stuff that's happening right now. She was 10 years ahead of them. She was saying that Reagan would be president of the United States 10 years ahead. And she said people laughed at her and said, what a clown, and how could he be president? You know, but she knew who was pulling the strings and moving and which forces were on top of each other and how they moved around. And so I don't know if that's what you wanted me to get at, but Mae was a tremendous researcher, and we have a great loss in this country that there aren't more like her, and that there aren't, I mean, there's enough people in this room, half the people in this room, if you wanted to put your energy to it, could take all the newspapers and share notes and do the work and break the thing. But unfortunately, there's a few of us, and we usually work alone or with a few other friends. But I would call Mae, and I'd say, Mae, did you see this article, and do you know this? And she'd get the connection, and she'd say, oh, my aching ass.
Are we ready for questions? Okay, testing, okay. You alluded to MK Ultra and mass hypnosis or whatever. Is there some tie-in with Waco? Did you hint at that?
Well, there was an interesting article, I don't know if you saw it in the Village Voice about Waco, and they said that some Russians had come over with some kind of a device that would allow mind control or hypnosis by telephone, and that they could hook you up in the telephone and subliminally turn this thing on and give you mind control. And one of the agents talking to them was part of the FBI or ATF command around Waco, and the guy said, boy, I'd like to use that on David Koresh. And I mean, it just left the impression that maybe somebody had made Koresh into a sleeper. You know, I don't think Jones was in control of the situation after it got down to Jonestown. He said he had doubles. You know, I don't think a religious leader wants doubles. Does Jesus want another Jesus, or Buddha another Buddha? I think a religious leader wants to be it. And so, especially his kind. So I think if he had doubles, it was part of an intelligence operation. They had one situation where they described, the survivors said that Jones was shot dead in front of them, shot in the head by someone, fell dead, they saw the blood, he was taken to a back room, and 5 minutes later he came out with his sunglasses on, and they had Jones alive again. And this was, it might have been faked by him, but it might have been a situation where they actually killed Jones and put the double in and, you know, increased the faith, you know, with a guy that looked exactly like him. They were using these doubles. Oswald had doubles. So I think, you know, the body that came out of Jonestown, I don't believe was Jones. I looked at the pictures. He had tattoos in his chest and his arms. In the early pictures, there's no tattoos on this body. And the thing that convinced me was Walter Cronkite said 3 times that the body had been positively identified as Jim Jones. Not once, 3 times he told us it was Jim Jones. And he said that they checked the fingerprints twice. Well, you don't have to check the fingerprints twice. It's an elaborate operation. You look at several different things. If you're done with the fingerprints, you could go on to the teeth. It's like taking something on an atomic scale and weighing it twice to figure out what it weighs. What's the point? And the thing works. And so, you know, you do the procedure, you go to something else. But even the teeth don't tell you anything, because I found an article in Vermont magazine some years ago, and it was written by this guy who was the leading forensic dentist pathologist in the country, and he was the top expert on forensic dentistry. And he wrote the manuals that were later used at the University of Pennsylvania, but he was a student there in the 1952-53. He went to school there, and his roommate had come from Germany. His name was Hugo Blaschke. Well, you can look at Cornelius Ryan, The Longest Day, or any of the major books about Hitler. Hugo Blaschke was Adolf Hitler's personal dentist. And Hugo Blaschke told this guy, and it took him 23 years of investigating until he confirmed it and wrote this article and said that he now believed it and was sure, because he did all the research. And what Blaschke told him was, we switched the dental records so that the dental records would match the corpse. You don't have to switch the corpse, you switch the dental records, a lot less weight. You know, just put the other things in. These are Hitler's teeth now, and then they go to look for the teeth, and lo and behold, they match. Must be Hitler. You see, so that's the way you can do it or get out of it. But we don't even know, I think, that David Koresh died. I mean, they talked about tunnels. Do you remember this? That there were tunnels going in and out. You remember, even after the police seats, there was one guy out in the tool shed beyond the police line, and they arrested him. Well, how the hell did he get out there? You know, I mean, anything that was moving was probably under scrutiny or likely to be shot, and he's out beyond the police line all of a sudden. He had been in the house. They clearly had people infiltrated into the house that were FBI and from the intelligence agencies that were spying inside the house to tell them what was going on. Koresh had, you know, potentially a background that he could have been their agent. If Koresh was what they wanted, they could have grabbed him in the street. He was going out jogging. He was going into town. For several weeks before that, he wasn't some character that they couldn't see, had been sequestered in there for years. It would have been very easy to arrest him, but they created a hostage scenario and they dragged this situation out. Let me tell you, if I or anybody else with any kind of democratic action or movement, a peace background or anything else, done any kind of radical activity, holed myself up in a house and had a shootout with police and killed one, much less 6 federal agents, I would not last alive in that damn house for 6 minutes, much less 6 hours. And you can't tell me it's because of women and children. They kill women and children all over the world all the time. First to go, first victims of war and police activity. Anyway, they don't care about women and children. They would have gone in and wiped out that house. They left those people sit, and they got our attention for 6 weeks. They made a nice big show for us, and they said, look, watch what we're going to do. We're going to take in a tank, we're going to take in military weapons, and we're going to get rid of these people. And I have a friend who works in the press, and she said when they were done, she was crying, saw the house burning, and said people are dying in there. And the other press people said, thank God that story's over, let's go to the next one. And so they know how to inure us to the response that we're supposed to have. They throw up the trial balloon and they see how we react. So I think it's quite possible that Koresh or either other people either survived or were controlled themselves or were working for the government. Because they could have come in and out of there. There was also a count discrepancy. They said real early on that when the fire happened, there were 76 people dead, and then they had always said before that there were 96 people in the house. There was a 20-person discrepancy in the count, just like Jonestown, and it was never resolved. They never got a different count off of it. They just said that the FBI agent must have counted wrong. You know, the Guineas can't count, and you know, and so then it's buried. There's no way to count the bodies now, but people could have gotten out of the situation, and most likely, I think, they gassed that house on the far side of the house where the TV cameras were taken off so they couldn't see. They bashed through, a special team. They went in there and planted in certain locations these incendiary devices. In the ultra-red cameras above, you can see fire break out in the house at 4 different places simultaneously in the videos. And that's arson. That's not something falling off the wall because something knocks it. I mean, 4 different places in the corners of the house. That's how you start an arson fire, to burn the whole building down. So they knew what they were doing, but those people were either already out or they went in and shot certain ones. They said certain ones had bullet holes, just like Jonestown. Kill the certain ones you want, make sure they're dead, they can't get out, gas the rest, and then let them burn. And that's what I think they did, but I mean, the message to us, these people were no threat to anybody. You know, it's just, you know, they went in to move because they said that they were feeding rats and they were letting rats live in the neighborhood. Well, you know, the neighbors came out with signs. You know what the sign said? Cats, not cops. You see, the response is not cops. I mean, you have a little trouble with the neighbors. There are other ways to deal with it, friends. You don't have to burn down the whole damn neighborhood with a C4 incendiary device, you know, and say that the fire guys can't come out and put out the fire, you know, because they're afraid the move is going to shoot at them. You know, when they're 50 feet across the street and they got this huge thing that'll pump the water all the way down the block, they just sit there and watch it burn. You know, and the 4 cops that led the raid were the same 4 cops that led the raid years before in '78. They were part of the Red Squad for Rizzo, and they were never removed by the guy that came in subsequently. So I'd say, yeah, I mean, it's worth investigation, but I don't have the full story because we need to talk to the survivors. Not the phony survivors, but the real survivors. But the trouble with a lot of that is if we were in this lecture and there were 900 people here and we went out to take a leak and we came back and 897 of them were dead, you can't let the other 3 just walk out the door and say, well, they let us live so we could tell the story, and they all killed themselves. That's what Mark Lane and Charles Gary say. There were 36 official survivors, and most of them were intimates of Jones and heads of the People Temple, the people who were supposed to survive. The key basketball team happened to be out at the time and off in the boats, so the main people didn't get killed and continued to work in Grenada. where they set up a mental hospital to continue the testing, and that's the only place that was bombed by the U.S. government. The Air Force bombed this mental hospital. The doctors left and locked the patients in, 150 of them, and they burned the bodies and buried them immediately. And that was the second Jonestown that nobody talked about at all, in the Grenada invasion. But they had these people in there, and they knew who they were going to get, you know, and they had picked certain people to kill. And when they pulled the plug, that's who gets it, and nobody's allowed to survive. So, but you take the count that they had 1,200, 1,100, 1,200 people, and you end up with 915 dead, and you got 36 survivors. Whoops. That's the second count problem. We got some Jonestown people still around, folks, and no accounting for them. And I'll tell you who they are. They're the programmed assassins and the killers and the trained murderers that were running the concentration camp, and they moved them out into other countries, and they're still doing killing, and they're part of that dirty money. But you know, it doesn't add up the other way either. You don't get 915. Where's everybody else? Yeah, in the back.
The very first point you mentioned in your presentation involved the stratification of the economy in the United States and the movement of wealth upward, the dissolution of the middle class, and the dissolution of democracy in this country. Within the industrial world, what country you think represents the movement in the other direction best? First thing. And second thing, why doesn't the CIA take the trouble to take you out?
Well, it's the second question first. I get it quite often. It's probably the only lecturing profession where you get this question. You know, if I talk to you about gardenias, can you imagine somebody coming up and asking me why I wasn't dead yet? But, you know, the only thing I can say about it is they probably leave me alive to discredit me. I'm not that big a fish. I don't make that much of a dent. How much, you know, it's easier to say that guy's a crank than to knock me off. If I knock me off, maybe somebody will look into my death and think it meant something. Who am I bothering? I'm not on national TV. I got on one time by a total fluke on the C-SPAN. I said what I could, and, you know, they showed it 2 or 3 times, and then it's off the air, you know. But I can't get an audience. I can't even get in the left press. I printed all that Jonestown information, spent 3 years. I footnoted all of it. I put an article called The Black Hole of Guyana, you know, and The Nation, and I sent it to The Progressive, and I sent it to left papers all over the country, and in these times, and nobody would touch it with a pole. I was supposed to get it into Maximum Rock and Roll, a punk paper, and they turned it down and gave me a kill fee. I mean, nobody wanted to print this thing. Now it's in secret and suppressed. I guess that's the right title for the book, for it to be in, because you couldn't print the damn thing. I finally printed it myself, and judge for yourself, you know, and it got in there. But I mean, you know, and it gets out, and now other people print it. Like I got this thing today, Odeon Press, by a guy I know, Zepzauer, out in Santa Cruz, and he's got this thing, The CIA's Greatest Hits, and hit number 28 is the Jonestown. And he's got everything I just told you, and he hasn't got my name on it. So, you know, by the time it gets out, you know, who else did that is this guy, Lars Hansen. He took all the stuff on Jonestown and all my stuff on JFK from my tapes directly, verbatim from my tapes, and he put them in a book called Proud to Serve or Called to Serve or some crap by Bo Greitz. So Bo Greitz, you can read Bo Greitz and think, boy, what a bright guy. It's my stuff that he's using in order to get the credibility to come in, and he hangs Nazi flags and memorabilia on the wall of his talks. He gives a semi-automatic weapon as a door prize. He founded U.S. Veterans of America to counter the Vietnam veterans against the war, which were the biggest witnesses against Vietnam, and finally brought the war to a halt. He had to go against them. He's the Rambo figure you see in the movies is based on Bo Greitz. He took phony money from Ross Perot to go back in and find these POWs and MIAs, and one of his buddies got burned by the DEA and the drug dealers and the CIA, and so now he's outraged, and he's going to tell you all about this one guy, Kun Sa, who's supposedly running all the drugs in the world. Well, the drugs in the world moved out of the Golden Triangle a while ago. It's not that none come from there, but they got competing routes, and that's all. I mean, he's just making a stink, and he's a little mad, but he has no politics. He's ready to go back to Vietnam and continue the genocide. He still hates people of color. He's got reactionary and fascist ideology in politics. He gets up and talks about how Jewish bankers run the world and all these secret cabals, you know, but they put my stuff in there so that you'll listen to him, you know, and that's what you get. You'll get these guys like William Cooper I talked about to somebody over the break, and they'll come out in the former Navy intelligence, but that doesn't matter, you know. You know, we were just supposed to trust him, and so he comes and tells us, look, there's gray and green aliens. And they fight each other and they run the world. Or now I heard there's 9 different kinds of aliens, and they all came here and they took over, and they do experiments in underground military bases, and they secretly run the government, and the Secret Service agent in front of Greer shot Kennedy because he was going to tell us about the aliens that really run the government. And that's really why they killed Kennedy. He turned around the front seat with a pistol and shot Kennedy in the head. Well, that's a Secret Service procedure in front of all the rest of the Secret Service and everybody in the country. It's a Secret Service agent that's driving a car, pull out a pistol. Well, I mean, if you want to believe it, but you can't get the brain matter to go back in that direction. It goes the other way, so something's wrong with the story. But he shows this grainy old copy of the Zapruder film. He says, believe me, I know who killed Kennedy, and I know all about these UFOs. Well, I'll tell you what. Aliens took over the U.S. government 1945 to 1948. They were German nationals. They were Nazis. That's the aliens that took over this government. Yeah, they have secret underground military bases, and they have UFOs, because that was Nazi technology. They found it in the caves, in the aerospace caves, in 1945, 1946. When they went in there to look for the technology, they found working jet engines, and they found flying discs. They were developed by specific German scientists. Those scientists were brought here, and when we saw those discs in 1947, because they were secret technology, we were told to believe either we saw swamp gas or we saw little green men from Mars. Well, there were green men in them. They were wearing green U.S. Army uniforms, and they were flying them around, and the rest of them were remotely piloted vehicles that they had up in the air, and they go tremendous speeds, and they make gyroscope turns, and they have advanced, you know, aeronautics and everything else that you're not supposed to know about, and that's the game. But they also wanted, they had a whole, do you know the whole group of British intelligence in World War II was called the Martians? Because they worried that when the war ended and there weren't any more Nazis to be afraid of, they'd have to come up with a scenario for social control, and guess what it would be? An invasion of aliens from outside to make us all be unified again under the government to protect us, you see? And so you get these phony documents, Majestic 12, you know, and they say there's a secret government and they're dealing with the aliens. Let me tell you something. If you had the smarts to get out of your damn gravity well and get up into space, and you had the smarts to survive for interstellar travel over light years of space, and you're smart enough to get through all of that to another solar system, and you're smart enough to find a planet with some kind of evolved life on it, and you're smart enough to come down and take a look at them, and you get here and do that, you're damn well smart enough to turn around, if you're that smart. Because there ain't nothing here. If you and I get in a time machine and go back to caveman days, are we going to spend 40 years hiding behind a rock so the caveman can't see us, and if one comes around the rock, grab him and say, what's his arm do? And pull it up and down and abduct him for 4 hours and stick a needle in his nose, but don't tell anyone we're here. Might scare them cavemen. I mean, cut me a break. Why would they have the fear from us? They've got the technology to get here. They got the technology to take off. No, they want to involve themselves in human evolution. They got special plans. They want to impregnate women so they can see what alien human babies look like, you know? Like we go impregnate a donkey to see what a donkey human baby looks like. We pull wings off of flies for 40 years. What do they do? But we're smart. We can get off the planet. We can live in space. They know space. They're trying to colonize Moon and Mars because they know they haven't got much left here, all the pollution, the radiation that they've released into this biosphere. Do you know that the radiation pollution released by making a bomb, from the mining and the tailing of the bomb and the getting of the uranium-235 and the building of the bomb, that the radiation released in the biosphere is more than the bomb will release when it explodes? In other words, that whole nuclear arsenal already went off about 3 times over. You wonder why people are dying of immune diseases? And the immune system failing, and you have a level of chemical toxins higher than the radiation level. But I'll tell you what, you go look at Lancet magazine, they studied AIDS. They looked at the sperm. They can't find any live virions in the sperm. They can't find an HIV virion in the sperm. They studied sperm from AIDS patients all over the country. They can't find AIDS in the sperm. You know what the lattice distance is in a standard rubber? 10 microns wide. You know the size of an HIV virus? 4 microns wide. Rubbers don't stop it. Not in the sperm. Doesn't pass by sexual contact. I'm no doctor. I'm no scientist. I went and read the articles. I'm just telling you common sense. There's plenty of other reasons to use rubbers and have safe sex in a country where other kinds of diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, are now pandemic, which is beyond epidemic. Safe sex is a good thing to have for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is there's too many of us. But that's a bonus on the AIDS, you see, that get everybody afraid of sex. Afraid of human contact. Afraid to know each other. It's one more bonus. How do you get AIDS? I think you inject it. You inject it in a select community. You inject it in gay people in prisons. You give it to gay people that come in to sexually transmitted disease centers, which was 95% of the early AIDS patients had been to an STD clinic. You inject it into them in captive populations, and you spread it that way. It doesn't spread easily. It doesn't spread by sneezing. It doesn't spread by screwing around even. It's blood to blood. It's injected into the blood, whatever the hell it is. And I'm not sure it's HIV. You got a lot of HIV positive, no AIDS. A lot of AIDS, no HIV. It's doing something to the immune system. It's breaking down the section of the immune system that creates the macrophages. Okay? And by the time you find out that that's broken down, the last cycle has happened. And that particular gland is eroded. We don't know if that's HIV. HIV could be a cofactor or a trigger device of some kind to something else, to an already potentially devolved immune system from all the toxins. We don't know what it is. Who told us what it is? Gallo, from where? Center for Disease Control and Fort Detrick. National Cancer Institute, Fort Detrick. Biological warfare. Crossover staff from Center for Disease Control and Fort Detrick. That's who told us. The same people that lied to us about Jonestown, about Cameroon, and everything else told us about AIDS. The same professionals. I'm not saying I know how it happens, but I'm saying you gotta look at things twice. You gotta not just buy what they're telling you. You know, swine flu breaks out. Where's swine flu come from? Where was the first case of swine flu? Fort Dix, New Jersey. Storage, biological warfare. Main storage point. Soldier gets sick with swine flu. Swine flu has not been around in World War I. Big outbreak of swine flu. We're going to get swine flu. We've got to take these shots. I start hearing on the radio. I'm living in Philadelphia. Black community is not getting its shots. Doctors are worried. Blacks aren't coming in for their shots. I mean, what other aspect of black health have they ever worried about? When have you ever heard an announcement worrying about black people getting any kind of health care in this country? But they got to make sure those blacks come in and get their shots. Well, any black person I knew and myself, I said, don't go down and get that shot. People got to start getting sick with Guillain-Barré or these different diseases. The elderly were dying from the shots. They are not trying to protect you. I'm not saying you use medicine, use common sense, use alternative stuff, but just don't buy it, especially on a mass level. You don't know what they're doing. And they put out this thing about AIDS. I found an article, a study in the Washington Post, 36% of the childbearing age women on Hopi reservations have AIDS. What's that? Hemophiliacs? Needle use? Prostitution? Sex? What's that? Hopi reservations, 36% of the childbearing age women have AIDS and none of the men? That's something they give you. That's not something you get. That's something they give you. And where's AIDS nationally? Is it gay population, white male population? No. 98% of the new AIDS cases as of the early 90s, black women. Worldwide, a black disease. Vast majority of AIDS cases in the worldwide figures are black people living in countries where the governments have been messed with by the CIA. Genocidal operations take place. That's who's got the AIDS.
John, how does Ross Perot count in all this or not count in all of this? And do you have any information surrounding why he dropped out of the race for the presidency? Do you think perhaps maybe he was threatened, his life was threatened?
I think Ross is one of the insiders. I think he had full access to the White House during the Reagan years. And Nixon years, I think he was a major contributor to the illegal Nixon war chest to continue the secret war in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, similar to the Contragate stuff. I think that he played a particular game in relation to that. I don't think he's an independent. I think he's what Huey Long talked about in the 1930s, that when fascism comes to America, it'll wrap itself in an American flag. I think he's a little dictator on a white horse that come in to save us with a lot of folksy talk. But when he talks about town meetings, he doesn't tell you who's going to determine what the questions are that'll be asked. If you aren't determining the questions, you might as well not have a town meeting. The way to go is open referendum, use the electronic media for full debate of issues from all sides, and he doesn't talk about that. He says it's going to hurt a little bit before it gets any better. He talks about raids into houses for the drugs. And he talks about the outer edges, not when he's being folksy and friendly, but when he gets down to the point. But I think in the end, you can't find anybody really who's going to lead us out of this. We're either going to all get out of it or none of us are going to get out of it. You know, because I think as far as they're concerned, almost all of us are dead already. And our option is to die on our knees or die on our feet. And some of us, I suppose, in that struggle might see a way not to die. But without making that struggle, it's just a game. And there's no point, I think, in putting your hope in somebody that's going to come and save everybody. That's what's wrong. I mean, what's wrong is that you've put that decision-making power in the hands of other people for all this time, and they haven't made very good decisions so far. And it's time that you take responsibility for your own life and for your own things and to change it.
I think I was here first. I was wondering if you are familiar with a manual that was supposedly written as a military training manual called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars.
No. Are you?
Just heard a little bit about it. I've never been able to get a hold of a copy. What I do know of it is that it's supposedly based on the work of a Russian economist whose name eludes me right now. Do you remember what his name was? Okay. Okay.
All I know is that written in hand on the printout off of the desk from the government computer that was sold at auction. That is, that's where it came from, I believe. It said that the individual that had got it had printed it out for distribution.
Okay.
And it's most illuminating.
What I have heard was that this economist, who is a Nobel Prize winner, basically developed an economic theory that it's analogous to electronic circuit theory. In other words, you could calculate out inputs and outputs in economics. Basically, calculating in things like population sizes, crop yields, you know, all kinds of stuff like that, and come out with, you know, in other words, by manipulating the input, you could get a scenario that you wanted. And some people would say this is the basis of the so-called New World Order, is that you manipulate these input factors and, you know, the world shifts the way, the power shifts the way you want it to shift.
Well, I mean, certainly they do manipulate things. I mean, you know, I don't know that they need a particular system. I mean, some of the manipulation is fairly crude. A lot of the stuff they do to me is fairly obvious. They it's just like anything else. If it ain't broke, you don't fix it. And you know, so they pull off what I consider to be fairly crude manipulations. But the basic manipulations of economies and what make economies not work, I think, is centralization. And especially centralizations of the issuance of currency and credit, so that people can't, you know, exchange with each other, and then interruptions in the economy that produce no goods, and therefore artificially creating inflation as well as pulling the money into certain sectors. Those have been around basically since the 1100s when the Enclosure Acts were passed by the nobles in England, and they said that you could rope off as much land as you could hire thugs to protect, and they'd issue you a king's title for it, and you could call it your own instead of Commonwealth. And so as long as you have Commonwealth and government protected and violence protected right to land and right to resources, and you have private wealth only, and you have money that's owned by that private wealth and issued by that private wealth and then taxed whenever you get any of it, as well as charging you interest if you borrow any of it because you don't have any of it. I mean, you got an economy in this country, $7 trillion, I think it's close to 8 now, but $7 trillion the last time I looked, out on credit. $500 billion in the banks, and $5 billion in the FDIC. Am I getting through to you? When you pull that credit string, there ain't nothing left. And maybe the Rockefellers will get the $5 billion in the FDIC, but it won't be any of you. When the insurance companies can't pay their bills, like in this recent disaster down in Florida, you're in trouble because the insurance companies in this country own the banks. That means the banks can't pay the bills. The saving and loans is just step one of the drain pattern. The banks are next. They're predicting 300 bank failures this year nationally. Okay. But once that cycle starts to go, if your imagination doesn't go beyond money that they're issuing in order to live life, which you're living, you're dead. If you can't think of some other way to interchange or interact with people, or to trust people, or to do the business that you have to do, then you're dead. It's the same thing. Can you imagine this city tomorrow if they cut the water, cut the trucks coming into the grocery stores, cut the highways, and cut the electricity? Not only how long would people survive, but how long would people survive each other? I mean, once they do anything like that, the cities get nasty. And when you withdraw credit like they did in the credit crash in the 1930s, all the raw material's there. All the tools of production are there. All the labor's there. All the distribution system's there. Nothing missing. It wasn't there yesterday, except money, except credit. And if you stop working at that point, you're like a carpenter who goes to work and you say, can't work today, no inches on the ruler. See, money isn't wealth. It's a measure of wealth, perhaps, but it isn't wealth. It's a means of exchange. Instead of carrying the wealth around in bulk, it's a simple way to do the barter or the exchange system. But if they own and monopolize the way that money's issued, and you don't have any other way to imagine issuing credit to anybody, then you're in tough shape. So really, I mean, a major job you have to do now is to think through an ethical credit system that's going to survive beyond this. And I'm not talking survivalist stuff. You know, the Republican, they talk about the family ethic. Bush talks about the family ethic. He said, I've unleashed the Bush family on America. The family ethic in the Bush family, pardon my French, is I've got mine, F you. That's the family ethic they're talking about. I got my level of privilege, and the hell with you. But you see, they don't understand the other game. They don't understand human trust or community, love or caring for other people or connecting with other people or trying to live a decent life or principled. They don't get it. Are there any more questions? Thanks very much for the opportunity and to talk to you.